Before we dive into today's eerie adventure, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out on any of our haunting stories. Welcome back to Past the Pumpkin's Glow. Let's dive right into our stories tonight. The day had started out as any other Saturday in the sleepy town of Ashford. The sun was high and laughter filled the air as my friends and I planned our weekend escapade. There's something about the blend of autumn's chill and the thrill of Halloween around the corner that makes even the most skeptical among us open to the idea of ghosts and the supernatural. Our group, a close-knit bunch of college friends, decided on a whim to visit the old Native American cemetery on the outskirts of town. It was said to be haunted, a rumor that had circulated in our town for as long as anyone could remember. I, Alex, have always been fascinated by the stories woven into the fabric of Ashford, especially those that flirt with the edges of reality. Among my friends, there were Mike and Josh, the ones with girlfriends who tagged along. And then there was Tyler, always the joker. And finally, Emma, whose belief in the paranormal exceeded us all. Our dynamics were a mix of skepticism and curiosity, making us the perfect candidates for a ghost hunting adventure. Or so we thought. As we arrived at the cemetery, the sun began its descent, casting long shadows between the weathered tombstones. The air was filled with the whispers of leaves, and a sense of solemnity enveloped us. The ancient burial ground with its tales of spirits and old souls seemed to watch us with a quiet, unsettling gaze. "Let's make this interesting," Tyler said, pulling out his phone. "Let's see if we can catch some ghostly voices on my voice recorder. You know, like those ghost hunting shows?" Laughter and a few eye rolls followed, but we all gathered around, eager to play along. We started asking questions into the air, half expecting to hear a whisper or feel a cold touch. "Is anyone there? Can you make a sound?" The questions felt silly at first, echoing into the silence. After several minutes with no responses, our initial amusement began to fade, giving way to a sense of awkwardness. "I feel like a total idiot," Mike confessed, and we all nodded, sharing the sentiment. It was then that Tyler, ever the entertainer, switched his phone to video mode and began narrating our adventure in an exaggerated imitation of a famous ghost hunting show. We couldn't help but burst into laughter, breaking the eerie atmosphere as we mocked the very idea of communicating with the dead. We wrapped up our makeshift investigation after about 20 minutes, realizing the chill of the night was creeping in more insistently than any ghostly presence. The darkness of the cemetery around us felt less like an ominous setting for supernatural encounters, and more a stark reminder of the late hour and dropping temperatures. Our adventure, initially spurred by a mix of curiosity and jest, hadn't managed to stir up anything more than the cold. Laughing off our failure to connect with the afterlife, we casually made our way out, our breath visible in the cold air, the sound of our voices and steps a comfortable backdrop against the silent gravestones. It wasn't until the next morning, as I sat alone with my coffee, that curiosity got the better of me. I decided to review the footage and audio we'd captured, expecting nothing more than a few laughs at our antics. Little did I know that decision would unravel a thread of reality I had always believed to be fiction. As the morning light cast a serene glow through my window, I sipped my coffee, the events of the previous night replaying in my mind with a mixture of amusement and embarrassment. With a half-hearted chuckle, I retrieved Tyler's phone from where it lay on my coffee table, a relic of our foolhardy adventure into the world of the supernatural. I plugged in my headphones, hit play on the audio recordings first, and leaned back, expecting to be entertained by our naivety. The recordings started off just as I remembered, our voices filled with a mix of skepticism and forced bravado, asking the empty air frivolous questions. But then, about 10 minutes in, I paused, frowning. Amidst our laughter, there was something else. A faint whispering that seemed almost in response to one of Emma's questions. I replayed the segment, my heart rate picking up as the indistinct murmurs became undeniable. The laughter from our group suddenly seemed out of place, stark against the soft, eerie whispers that I couldn't recall hearing at the moment. With a growing sense of unease, I switched to the video recordings. The screen lit up to show Tyler's face, illuminated by the phone's light, doing his best impression of a paranormal investigator. We were all there, a circle of friends bound by disbelief, mocking the very idea of an unseen world. But then, as the camera panned around the darkened cemetery, I froze. There, just for a split second, was a figure standing among the tombstones, a shadow that hadn't been there, a presence none of us had noticed. I rewound the video, my fingers trembling slightly as I paused on the frame. The figure was barely discernible, but it was unmistakably human-shaped, an ethereal outline in the darkness. Panic and fascination warred within me as I watched the video again and again, each playback sending shivers down my spine. How had we not seen it? Was it simply a trick of the light? Or had our jests unwittingly invited something to reveal itself? I knew I had to share this with the others. Gathering my courage, I sent a group message, inviting them over under the guise of watching the recordings for a laugh. But as I waited for their arrival, a sense of dread settled over me. We had ventured into the unknown with laughter, but what had followed us back? When the group arrived, they were in high spirits, still amused by our night's adventure. But as I played the recordings, the room grew silent, the atmosphere turning heavy. The whispers in the audio, the shadowy figure in the video, it all seemed so much more sinister now. "Is this some kind of joke, Alex?" Mike asked, his voice tight. "I swear I haven't altered these," I responded, my voice barely above a whisper. The room was filled with uneasy glances as we all struggled to make sense of the evidence before us. Emma, the believer among us, looked pale but vindicated. "I told you there was something about that place," she murmured, her eyes not leaving the screen. The laughter was gone, replaced by a palpable tension. Questions flew, theories were posited, and skepticism clashed with fear. The reality we had all taken for granted was suddenly not so solid. Had our mockery invited an interaction from beyond? Or had we simply stumbled upon something that was always there, waiting to be acknowledged? In the days that followed, our group was irrevocably changed. Conversations turned to whispers, laughter to silence. The cemetery, once a place of historical curiosity, now held a sense of foreboding, a reminder of the night we peered into the unknown and found something staring back. As for me, I find myself caught between worlds. The rational part of my mind seeks logical explanations, clinging to the hope of a misunderstood anomaly. Yet, deep down, a part of me knows we touched something beyond the veil that night. Something ancient and indescribable. Our adventure into ghost hunting had started as a jest, a way to mock the shadows and laugh in the face of the unknown. But as I sit here, replaying the recordings for the umpteenth time, I can't shake the feeling that we awakened something, or perhaps it was simply waiting for someone to listen. It was supposed to be an ordinary Friday night. The kind where you end up lounging at someone's house playing video games until you pass out. But when Mark suggested we sneak into the old nature park on the edge of town, curiosity got the better of us. The place was known for its walking trails that led to a muddy rock face called the Dunes. Local legends said weird things happened there, but we'd never checked it out ourselves. It was a still night, the air heavy with the scent of pine and earth as our group of 5 made our way under the cover of darkness. We were halfway joking, half serious about finding something cool, maybe an abandoned campsite or some old graffiti. The path to the dunes was eerier than expected. The trees seemed to close in around us, and every little noise was amplified. We joked about what the creatures of the night were up to, trying to mask our nervousness with laughter. That was until we reached the clearing. There in the moonlit darkness of the dunes was a group of people. At first, we thought they were just some goth kids from our school, the ones who always wore black and had an affinity for creepy jewelry. But as we hid behind a thick copse of bushes, we realized there were adults among them, which was odd. They were gathered in a circle, candles flickering at their feet, illuminating symbols that looked like they were drawn in blood mixed into the dirt. It didn't seem real, more like a scene out of one of those cult classic films, rather than something you'd stumble upon in real life. Their heads were bowed, hands joined, and although we couldn't hear what they were saying, the whole setup made my skin crawl. We were about to whisper among ourselves when a twig snapped underfoot, a sound so sharp in the stillness that everyone froze. The circle broke in an instant, figures dispersing into the darkness like shadows melting away. They moved with a purpose, a practiced ease that suggested this wasn't their first secretive gathering. Silence fell over the dunes again, so dense it felt like another presence. We waited, hearts pounding, not daring to move lest one of them was still lurking nearby, waiting for us to reveal ourselves. But then, a brisk wind whipped through the clearing, snuffing out the candles in one breath. It felt like a sign, a dramatic cue in a play telling us to exit the stage. We didn't need to be told twice. Moving as quietly as we could, we retraced our steps. The normal sounds of the night had returned, but they did little to ease the tension that clung to us. We walked faster, the familiar path somehow seeming longer in our rush to leave. Once we were safely back on the main road, the floodgates opened. Everyone spoke at once, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. Was it just a weird ritual? Or something more sinister? The symbols, the mix of kids and adults, it didn't add up. We never got the answers we were looking for, and none of us were brave enough to go back to the dunes. But sometimes, when the wind is just right, I think I can hear the faint sound of chanting carried on the breeze. A reminder of the night we stumbled upon something we were never meant to see. Our family trip to St. Augustine started as a dive into history, but ended up feeling more like a plunge into the paranormal. We'd booked an old colonial Airbnb, drawn by its antique charm and stories of historic haunts. St. Augustine, with its cobblestone streets and centuries-old buildings, was the perfect backdrop for a little adventure. From our first night in the Airbnb, the air felt heavy with more than just Florida's summer humidity. Ellie, our youngest, was the first to notice. She kept glancing towards the hallway, whispering about seeing shadows that moved. My wife and I chalked it up to an active imagination fueled by the ghost tours we'd taken during the day. The house creaked and groaned like any old structure would, but by the second night, those sounds seemed to carry weight, as if the very walls were whispering back to us. Cold spots appeared and disappeared without any reason. And objects, a book, a cup, a toy, would be found slightly moved from where we'd left them. On our third night, the unsettling incidents escalated. We were all awakened by the sound of footsteps in the attic above. Thinking perhaps an animal had gotten inside, I went to investigate. The attic was cramped and dusty, filled with trunks and old furniture covered in sheets. But it was empty. No animals, no people. Yet, the air felt charged, as if something unseen was standing just out of sight. As I descended the stairs, Ellie screamed from her room. We rushed to her and found her sitting up in bed, eyes wide with fright. She stammered out that a man, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, had been standing at the foot of her bed. According to Ellie, he looked sad and kept looking around the room as if searching for something he'd lost. That was enough for us. We decided to spend the next day out and about, away from the house as much as possible. In town, we stopped by a small local museum where we learned about the home's original owner, a sea captain who had mysteriously vanished in the 1800s, leaving behind his family and a house filled with sorrow. Convinced now that perhaps Ellie had seen the captain, or at least the imprint of his long-ago presence, we consulted with a local paranormal expert. She wasn't surprised by our experiences. The house, she explained, was known for such occurrences. echoes of the past that sometimes bled into the present, particularly when the house decided you were worth revealing its secrets to. For our last night, we stayed in a modern hotel downtown. The contrast between the light, airy hotel room and the heavy, whispering darkness of the Airbnb was stark. We left St. Augustine with mixed feelings, enriched by the history but unnerved by its depth. Our family trip had turned into a ghost story of our own, one that we'd share for years, always wondering if what we experienced was real. Every summer, Camp Redwood transforms into a little paradise for kids who come from all corners of the state, eager for adventure and the simple joy of summer camp. This year was no different, and at 16, being a camp counselor felt more like a privilege than a job. I was especially excited to be put in charge of the 7-year-olds. They were always brimming with energy, their laughter and screams filling the camp from dawn till dusk. The first few days flew by in a blur of activities. We went swimming in the lake, hiked through the nearby woods, crafted all sorts of colorful messes, and ended each day with stories around the campfire. Those evenings were my favorite part. There's something magical about sitting under the stars, the fire crackling and kids clutching their marshmallow sticks, their faces a mixture of excitement and the tiny thrill of fear from the spooky stories we shared. One night, after one such story session, I was making sure everyone was settled in for the night. As I walked past cabin 4, a murmur of whispers caught my attention. Curious, I paused and listened. They were talking about the Shadow Man, a spectral figure said to haunt the camp every summer, allegedly spiriting away one child who would never be seen again. I chuckled softly to myself. Camp legends were always a hit, but they were just stories, or so I believed. The next morning, however, Timmy, one of the quieter boys, seemed visibly shaken. He stuck close to me throughout the day, casting nervous glances towards the dense tree line that bordered the camp. When I finally coaxed him into talking, he whispered, "The Shadow Man is real, isn't he?" I knelt beside him, putting on my most reassuring smile, and told him that it was just a campfire story, nothing more. But that night, my reassurance seemed to have done little to calm the nerves. As I did my usual rounds, I noticed Timmy's bed was empty. A spike of panic shot through me as I hurriedly searched the campgrounds, eventually finding him at the edge of the forest, staring into the dark woods. "He's coming for me," he muttered when I approached him. I felt a surge of cold despite the warm night air, but managed to convince him to return to his cabin. That unease didn't leave me that night, and I found myself restless. Then, just past midnight, the sound of footsteps outside jolted me upright. Peering out, I saw a tall, dark figure moving towards the forest. My heart pounded as I grabbed a flashlight and followed, the night air heavy with an eerie silence. Deep in the forest, the air grew unnaturally cold. The silence was suffocating. Suddenly, I felt a cold touch on my shoulder. Whirling around, the beam of my flashlight landed on a gaunt figure with hollow, piercing eyes. My breath caught in my throat. The figure was more terrifying than any campfire tale could have hinted at. Panic surged through me as its icy gaze locked onto mine. I turned and ran, heart racing, as branches whipped past my face. I thought I had escaped when suddenly the figure appeared again, right in front of me. My flashlight flickered as I stumbled backwards, the shadowy figure advancing. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to escape the suffocating darkness that seemed to close in around me. The forest felt alive, hostile, each shadow and rustle magnifying my fear. I dashed through the undergrowth, tripping over roots and dodging low-hanging branches, my breath ragged and loud in the oppressive silence. I ran until my legs burned and my lungs ached, but the dark figure seemed to glide effortlessly, always just a few steps behind. Just when I thought I might collapse from exhaustion, a light appeared through the trees. I pushed towards it, desperate for any sign of safety. I woke at dawn, disoriented, lying at the forest's edge. My body ached and my clothes were torn. I stumbled back to camp, where the children and staff were waiting anxiously. They rushed towards me, relief flooding their features when they saw me. They told me Timmy was found safe, asleep in his bunk. No one else had seen the figure, and my story turned into yet another camp legend. I never returned to Camp Redwood after that summer. Each year, as summer approached, I found myself thinking about the camp, about Timmy, and about the Shadow Man. I warned new counselors about him, half in jest, half in earnest, hoping no one else would encounter what I did that night. The line between legend and reality had blurred for me, and the woods at Camp Redwood now held a cautionary tale, one rooted in my own fears and the inexplicable events of that unforgettable summer. When I moved to the suburbs, I was really looking for peace. The neighborhood seemed perfect with friendly folks and neat little houses. It felt like I'd made the right choice. Keeping up with my jogging routine here felt right at home too. But then things got weird. One evening while the sun was going down, I noticed this guy standing way down the street. He was just staring my way and didn't wave back when I tried to greet him. Gave me the creeps, but I tried to brush it off as nothing. As the weeks went by, this guy kept showing up, always just watching me. At first it was from far away, but then he started getting closer to my house. It got to the point where I'd see him just across the street, watching me come and go. That really started to freak me out. One night, I got enough courage to try and talk to him. I thought if I confronted him, he might stop, but he just disappeared into the shadows like some sort of ghost as soon as I got close. That scared me even more. It didn't stop there. He began following me when I went out for my runs. No matter how I changed my route, he was always a few steps behind. It got so bad, I stopped running in the evenings altogether and tried to stay around more crowded places during the day. One night, I changed my jogging path last minute and saw him again. Panic kicked in, and I ran to a friend's house nearby. We called the cops, but he was gone by the time they showed up. That didn't make me feel any safer, though. I decided to do something about it. I put up security cameras around my house and got some better lights outside. I even talked to an old friend who became a detective to see if he could help. He suggested setting up a sting operation to catch this guy. We planned it out, and I went jogging like usual, but this time the cops were ready and waiting. It worked. They caught him, and I finally got some answers when they questioned him. Turns out he's a regular guy who lives not too far away. He's got a wife and kids, which made me feel even weirder about the whole thing. He told the cops he saw me at some event a while back and just couldn't stop thinking about me after that. I don't know why he chose me, but it really messed up his life and his family's life too. On an overcast afternoon, I found myself wandering aimlessly around the house. As I thumbed through dusty pages of photographs, a sudden movement outside of the front window caught my eye. There, staring intently into the house, was a man. His face was unsettlingly familiar, yet I couldn't place where I had seen him before. His eyes, cold and calculating, seemed to pierce through the glass, studying me. His features were sharp, with a pronounced scar running down his left cheek, adding to his menacing demeanor. This sight sent a chill through me. Backing away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, I heard a series of loud knocks coming from the basement door. It was an aggressive rapping, insistent and urgent, as if demanding to be heard. The basement had no locks. It was just a flimsy wooden door that I always thought could barely keep out the cold, let alone an intruder. Panic set in as I heard simultaneous knocking on both the front and back doors. It was as if these unseen assailants were communicating, cornering me. Who are these people? What do they want? I muttered to myself, overwhelmed with fear. Fumbling with the kitchen wall phone, I dialed my neighbor's number with trembling hands. When they answered, I was already in tears, barely managing to explain that people were trying to break into my house. My neighbor quickly glanced outside but saw no signs of disturbance, which only deepened the mystery. We hung up and they dialed 911 on my behalf. As I stepped away from the phone, my foot slipped in something. I looked down to find a growing pool of blood forming an eerie outline of two figures laying on the ground. My breath caught in my throat as I stared in horror. Then, in an instant, the scene dissolved. The blood, the knocking, the man at the window, all gone. I blinked, disoriented, and found myself in a stark, brightly lit room. Across from me sat a therapist, a calm presence in the clinical surroundings of what I now recognized as a psych ward. "You did great. You're safe now," the therapist reassured me. Their voice was gentle, but the shift from the vivid hallucination to reality was jarring. I was undergoing hypnotherapy, an attempt to piece together fragmented memories of the tragic night I lost my parents. I was too young then to remember faces clearly, but the therapy triggered a visceral reenactment. The weight of the revelation was crashing. The session had unearthed not just hidden fears, but the raw, unprocessed grief of a child who had never truly understood their loss. Now, surrounded by the sterile walls of the therapy room, the emotional floodgates had opened, and I was left to navigate the stormy waters of a past that had suddenly become all too real. My parents' case, or rather, cases, were never closed. Perhaps these new details will help find who did this. I never thought my life would be defined by a carnival. Growing up, I loved the carnival. The bright lights, the thrilling rides, the sweet smell of cotton candy. But now, the very mention of a carnival fills me with dread. It started 4 years ago when the traveling carnival rolled into our small town. Like everyone else, I was excited to go. I had just turned 21, and my friends and I decided to celebrate. We spent the day riding the Ferris wheel, playing games and laughing. It was the perfect evening, until it wasn't. As night fell, there was a different atmosphere. The lights seemed dimmer, the laughter more sinister. My friends and I decided to check out the House of Horrors. It was the main attraction, known for its lifelike scares and eerie atmosphere. The line was long, and by the time we got to the front, my friends were ready to chicken out. But I was determined. I paid for my ticket and stepped inside, the heavy curtain falling behind me. The interior was pitch black, and I could barely see a few feet in front of me. I felt a sense of unease, but I brushed it off as nerves. As I made my way through the twisted hallways, I heard strange noises, whispers, footsteps, and the faint sound of calliope music. The scenes were grotesque, filled with fake blood and severed limbs. I tried to focus on getting through as quickly as possible, but something felt off. Then I saw him, a man dressed as a Carny with a painted smile that didn't reach his eyes. He stepped out of the shadows, blocking my path. "Lost, are we?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. Before I could react, he grabbed me, dragging me into a hidden room. I struggled, screamed, but the walls were soundproof. He tied me up and locked me in a small, dark room. Hours turned into days, and I lost track of time. He came to see me occasionally, bringing food and water but never speaking. The silence was unbearable and the fear was paralyzing. One night he left the door unlocked. I knew it was my only chance. I waited until I was sure he was gone, then crept out of the room. The carnival was silent, the lights off, and the ride still. I made my way to the exit, my heart pounding. As I neared the edge of the carnival, I heard a sound behind me. I turned to see him, his eyes filled with rage. "You can't escape," he snarled. I ran faster than I ever had before, bursting through the gates and into the street. I stumbled into the nearest house, pounding on the door and screaming for help. The family inside called the police, and I was taken to the hospital. I told them everything, about the Carny, the hidden room, and the horrors I had endured. The police raided the carnival and they found the room just as I described. They arrested the man, a carnival worker named Frank, who was later found guilty of multiple murders and trafficking. He had used the carnival as a cover for his crimes, preying on the vulnerable and the unsuspecting. The trial was long and painful, but I testified against him, ensuring he would never hurt anyone else. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now I try to move on with my life, but the memories haunt me. I can't go near a carnival, can't hear carnival music without feeling a wave of panic. But I survived, and I helped put a monster behind bars. And sometimes on quiet nights I can still hear his voice, a chilling reminder of the nightmare I escaped. But I'm free, and he's not. And that's something I hold on to. I share my story as a warning. The bright lights and cheerful facade of a carnival can hide dark secrets. Be careful, trust your instincts, and never go alone. You never know what horrors might be lurking behind the curtain. When my family first moved to the old town, I was the typical 17-year-old skeptical about leaving behind city life for the quiet, almost too quiet, streets of what seemed like a forgotten place. Our neighbor, Mr. Harrow, was one of the first to welcome us. Retired school teacher with a penchant for gardening and stories as colorful as his flower beds. One Saturday, while I was mowing the lawn, Mr. Harrow invited me over for an iced tea and offered a tour of his house. Known in the neighborhood for its eccentric interior and a basement filled with what he described as priceless memories from days gone by. Curiosity outweighed my initial reluctance. I had heard from local kids at school about Mr. Harrow's collection of antiques and oddities, and part of me was intrigued. Walking into Mr. Harrow's home felt like stepping into another era. The walls were lined with vintage photographs and old maps, and the air carried the musty scent of paper and wood. He led me to the basement, which was surprisingly well kept, with rows of shelves housing everything from old radios to foreign coins and military medals. As we delved deeper into his collection, Mr. Harrow seemed to grow more animated, detailing the origins of each piece with a historian's precision. The basement extended further than I had expected, and at the end of a long corridor, he paused before a large steel door that looked oddly out of place amidst the antiques. "This," he said, turning to me with a slightly too eager smile, "is where I keep more of my sensitive items. Not many get to see it, but I think you'll appreciate what's inside." He unlocked the door, revealing a room that was more of a bunker than part of a house. It was dimly lit, with items that looked more modern, less like antiques. Something about the atmosphere fell off, claustrophobic and overly secluded. As he ushered me inside, a sudden unease washed over me. The door shut with a heavy thud, and I realized there was no handle on the inside. Anxiety gripped me, and the walls seeming to close in. Mr. Harrow's voice became distant as I scanned the room for another exit. "There's something special I want you to see," he continued, oblivious to my discomfort. But my focus was on finding a way out. I politely declined, citing a made-up reminder about an errand I had forgotten. Mr. Harrow seemed disappointed, but unlocked the door and let me out. I excused myself quickly, my heart racing until I reached the safety of my own home. After that day, I told my parents about the experience in detail. Concerned for my safety and curious about the bizarre circumstances, they contacted the local police to report the incident. The police opened an investigation and discovered troubling details about Mr. Harrow. He had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, which had caused significant deterioration in his cognitive functions. His condition often made him revert to his behaviors and memories from long ago, some of which were deeply troubling. In their search of Mr. Harrow's basement, the police found homemade pillow shams and pieces of clothing made from fabrics identified in missing children's reports from decades ago. The discovery unraveled a darker side of Mr. Harrow's past that no one had suspected. As the investigation continued, the community struggled to reconcile the charming, elderly neighbor they thought they knew with the emerging evidence of his possible involvement in long-forgotten crimes. This incident left me wary of the unknowns hidden behind closed doors and the secrets that seemingly mundane places can hold. It was a chilling reminder that sometimes the surface only tells part of the story, and what lies beneath can be far more complex and disturbing. It was during a small weekend tour with my high school band that we decided to crash at our guitarist's house, a typical home with a sprawling basement where we all slept. The basement, while spacious, didn't have a bathroom, so any nighttime trips required a trek upstairs. I'm a heavy sleeper, and it usually takes a lot to wake me up, but that night, a pressing need dragged me from a deep sleep. In a groggy state, I navigated the dark staircase, relying on dim light filtering from the upstairs to guide my steps. At the top of the stairs, I turned right, facing the door leading to the main living area. The moonlight spilled across the hall from the bathroom, illuminating my path with a pale silver glow. After using the bathroom and still half asleep, I opened the door to head back downstairs. That's when I saw it. The door to the basement, which I was sure I had left open, was now eerily ajar. As I stared, trying to collect my drowsy thoughts, I noticed something even more unsettling. A set of long, thin fingers, silently reaching under the door. I stood there with my mouth open and I couldn't say a word, but I thought, what the hell? Then it dawned on me. It must have been one of my friends playing a trick on me. "No, you butt wipe, you almost had me," I called out, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet house. The fingers quickly withdrew under the door, and with a mix of relief and residual nerves, I opened it, expecting to catch one of my friends on the other side. But there was nothing, no one, just an empty, silent landing. Flipping on the basement lights, I called down, "Were any of you guys just at the top of the stairs messing with me?" From below, in the dim glow, came a few groans and this sleepy response. "Dude, we've been down here sleeping the whole time. Shh, you're gonna wake my parents up, dude." The air felt cooler as I stood there, the weight of the silence pressing around me. Everyone was exactly where I'd left them, sprawled in their sleeping bags. No one could have darted back down that fast without making a sound. I turned off the lights and tried to settle back into my spot, but sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. Every small noise seemed sinister, every shadow a potential hiding spot for whatever those fingers had belonged to. By dawn, with the house gradually stirring into life, I was the first to leave. The image of those cold, reaching fingers burned into my memory. A creepy reminder of a night that had started as just another band hangout. You know those old schools that just look like they should be haunted? That was the case with the middle school on the outskirts of our town. It had been abandoned for years, surrounded by overgrown grass and stories that seemed to grow wilder with each telling. None of us truly believed the tales, but curiosity has a way of getting the best of even the most skeptical. So, one fall evening, we decided to see for ourselves what secrets the old building hid. The place was a relic, a sprawling complex of classrooms and hallways that had once buzzed with the energy of young minds. Now, it was just a shell, the silence so deep you could almost hear the echoes of the past. We entered through the basement, the usual point of entry for anyone brave enough to explore. The window barely hanging on its hinges. As we descended into the bowels of the building, the air grew colder, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. Our flashlights flickered across graffiti-tagged walls and piles of debris that littered the floor, remnants of a bygone era. It wasn't long before we stumbled upon the makeshift living quarters. It was clear someone had been calling this place home. There was a dingy mattress, some canned food scattered about, and an old, battered radio playing a faint, crackling tune. But nothing prepared us for what we found next. In a dimly lit corner of the room sat an old man, his features etched with the lines of time and hardship. Across from him, seated as though in mid-conversation, was a corpse. The body was dressed up, propped in a chair, as if it were just another guest at a tea party. The old man was talking animatedly, gesturing occasionally to his silent companion. The scene was straight out of a horror film, so surreal that for a moment we could only stand there frozen. The man's voice was low, filled with emotion, as if he were discussing the weather instead of conversing with the dead. When he finally noticed us, his eyes locked onto ours with an intensity that made my stomach drop. It was then that the real fear set in. We ran, fueled by adrenaline and the kind of terror that clarifies your survival instincts. We didn't stop until we were out of that basement, out of the school, and back under the safety of streetlights. Once our breaths had returned and our hearts had slowed, we debated our next move. In the end, we decided to call the police anonymously, hoping to get the old man the help he clearly needed. The police later told the community that they had found the man, still in the basement, and had taken him to receive medical and psychological care. The body was identified as a local homeless person who had died of natural causes a few weeks prior. It was a sad story, the kind that leaves you questioning the thin line between sanity and insanity, between loneliness and despair. That adventure put an end to our explorations. The thrill of the unknown was forever tainted by the reality of what we had encountered. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the old man's voice, echoing through my dreams, a stark reminder of the night we found more than we bargained for in the shadows of that old school basement. I've always had a knack for the unexplained, those mysterious nooks of our world that seem to whisper secrets from the shadows. So when my friend Alex, who dabbles in paranormal investigation, asked me to explore the abandoned Evergreen Junior High, I jumped at the chance. Our mission was simple: to capture any residual energies lingering within the school's walls, focusing particularly on photography. Evergreen Junior High had been closed for over 2 decades under enigmatic circumstances, and had since become fodder for local urban legends. Situated on the town's outskirts, its vast, dilapidated structure was perfect for our investigation. As we arrived, the building stood silent and imposing against the twilight sky, its shadows stretching out as if to welcome us. We started at the old pool. Light streamed through the shattered windows, casting a mosaic of brightness across the glossy tiles lining the pool's walls. The pool itself was empty, its basin a canvas for shadows and echoes. Alex set up his digital camera, carefully adjusting the lens to encompass the scene. I roamed the edges, the quiet so intense it felt like a dense blanket. Suddenly, we noticed it. A stark, white outline that resembled a human figure by the pool's edge, visible only through the camera's viewfinder and dissolving when approached. Intrigued, we snapped several shots, each showing the ghostly sentinel, a beacon from another era, or perhaps a mere play of light. Buoyed by this discovery, we moved to the locker rooms. The air chilled noticeably as we entered, filled with the musty aroma of metal and decay. As Alex took more photos with his digital camera, soft thuds echoed from the back, like distant footsteps or objects falling. With each step deeper into the room, our discomfort grew, the noises tantalizingly just out of reach. Next was the pit, the nickname for the old wrestling gym known for its eerie atmosphere. Descending into the gym, the air turned damp and heavy, clinging to our skin. The darkness was enveloping, and the walls, slick with moisture, seemed to close in around us. The sensation of being watched intensified, nearly overwhelming, yet we pressed on, capturing images of the derelict mats and gear, half expecting an apparition to materialize. Our final stop was the science wing, known amongst locals as the Black Hole for its oppressive darkness. As we entered, the temperature dropped sharply, an expected phenomenon in old buildings, but here it felt especially pronounced. The labs were littered with glassware and papers, abandoned mid-experiment. The deeper we ventured, the stronger the sensation of an imposing presence grew, as if the air itself were urging us to leave. In one lab, Alex prepared his digital camera for a long exposure shot, hoping to capture subtle movements invisible to the eye. When the shutter closed, we reviewed the image. There in the corner was a shadowy figure, its outline blurred yet unmistakable, evoking a deep sense of dread. This terror, instinctual and raw, prompted us to leave quickly. We packed up and left Evergreen Junior High. The photo of the figure in the pool burned into my memory, its existence undeniable, yet inexplicable. We never did make it back to Evergreen. Sometimes late at night, I pull out that photo, wondering if we had glimpsed something truly otherworldly. or if it was just another trick of light and shadow. But one thing's for sure. I've never felt quite alone since that day. I've always been a night owl, so the graveyard shift at a 24-hour diner just off the interstate seemed like the perfect gig. The silver spoon wasn't much to look at, a relic from the 70s with its neon lights buzzing and the chrome siding trying hard not to show its age. It was a haven for truckers and lost souls seeking refuge in a cup of coffee during the night. The nights were typically uneventful. My routine was a well-oiled machine. Wipe down counters, serve the occasional wanderer, and lose myself in paperback novels between the ebb and flow of patrons. That changed one misty evening in November when he walked in. He entered silently, his presence palpable. Tall and lean, he looked like he'd spent a lifetime on the road. His first order was mundane, black coffee and apple pie, but his prolonged survey of the diner's layout unsettled me. Initially, I attributed his behavior to the caution of a seasoned traveler. His visits became a nightly occurrence, always the same booth, his back against the wall, eyes on the entrance. His questions evolved from casual chatter about the weather to probing inquiries about the diner's busiest hours, security, and my nightly solitude. The first note was innocuous, a simple thank you on a napkin under his coffee cup. But soon they became frequent and personal, revealing things like my car's make, my college classes, and my favorite books, details I had never shared. Each note sent a shiver down my spine. I rationalized it as a prank, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being scrutinized, like an insect under glass. One night, driven by fear and frustration, I confronted him. The diner was empty, the perfect moment to demand answers. "Why are you writing these notes? How do you know these things about me?" I demanded. He looked up, his gaze icy. "You never know who's watching," he replied calmly, a slight smile crossing his face. Shaken, I called the police after he left. It was a desperate hope that they might understand my alarm. The officers arrived swiftly, their seriousness a balm to my frazzled nerves. They listened as I recounted every interaction, handing over the collected notes, my hands trembling. The next day brought clarity. The man was a wanted fugitive linked to multiple disappearances along the interstate. People who had vanished without a trace, their last known stops at diners like the Silver Spoon. He was apprehended 2 towns over thanks to my description. As they escorted him away, he turned back, locking eyes with me. "You never know who's watching," he repeated. I resigned the following day. The diner remained, its neon sign flickering as if nothing had happened. But I was changed forever. Now, whenever I pass by, I feel the weight of his gaze, a reminder of the night when the ordinary became ominous. For at night, just before sleep claims me, his words echo in my mind. "You never know who's watching." This experience has imprinted a chilling lesson. Under the fluorescent lights, anyone could be a predator. And sometimes, danger is much closer than it appears. It was a night unlike any other, marked by an oppressive darkness that seemed to swallow the scant light of the stars. I had ventured out into the south field, driven by a restless energy that often took hold during the sleepless hours. My family had owned this land for generations, and yet, this particular field had always been a source of unease, whispered about in the family as unlucky or cursed. But I had never believed in such things. I prided myself on my practical nature, my feet firmly planted in reality. As I walked, the darkness seemed to press in around me, the silence of the night broken only by the occasional rustle of wildlife in the underbrush. The fields stretched out before me, an expanse of soon-to-be harvested wheat that whispered under the touch of a gentle breeze. It was then that I felt it, a disturbing sensation of being watched. The feeling made me alert and cautious. Turning slowly, I scanned the field. At first, I saw nothing but the endless waves of grain. But then, my eyes began to adjust to the darkness, and I saw them. Eyes. Hundreds of them, scattered across the field, like stars fallen to earth. They glinted in the dim light, unblinking and unnerving. I blinked hard, sure my mind was playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, they were still there, watching me. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that these were not the eyes of animals. These eyes had a human quality to them, filled with intelligence and a hint of malice. They blinked, then moved, shifting through the wheat in a rustling wave that sounded almost like whispered words. Panic set in then, primal and overwhelming. I turned and ran, my breath ragged in my ears, my only thought to escape those watching eyes. As I reached the edge of the field and crossed into the safety of the tree line, I dared a glance back. The field was empty, the eyes gone as if they had never been there at all. Now in the light of day, the field looks as it always has, innocuous, even beautiful, as the sun sets the wheat ablaze with golden light. But I know better. I have not set foot in it since that night, nor do I intend to. I've taken to locking the doors at sundown and keeping the curtains drawn, a small, perhaps futile gesture against whatever watches from the shadows. Curious for more creepy tales? Don't just listen to the shadows, join our community of the brave and the bold. Hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and ring the bell to never miss out on our allegedly true scary stories. Have your own ghostly encounters, sinister sightings, or otherwise scary event? Drop us a comment below. We're dying to hear from you.